need to pay our prosecutors and our public defenders more. That's the truth. Like, we need to pay them both more because they are on the front lines of justice. Public defenders are there serving poor people that can't afford lawyers, and prosecutors are there, and they both have huge caseloads and they get paid nothing.
Hey everyone, Beau Royal here, co-founder and CEO of Pareto Legal, a marketing agency that helps injury lawyers increase their profits with digital strategy, online advertising, and analytics. You're listening to the Pareto Legal Podcast, where we feature world-class attorneys, entrepreneurs, and legal experts. And today I am joined by Adriana Alcalde, partner at Eisenberg Baum, a New York-based law firm focused on civil rights cases, class action lawsuits, and various other areas of litigation. In this episode, we'll learn more about Adriana's background as a prosecutor in Fort Lauderdale, how Adriana has leveraged her media appearances to her professional benefit, and how she effectively leads, manages, and trains her team of attorneys. Adriana, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So over the last 20 years, you have helped countless victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, police misconduct, human trafficking, and child pornography. What inspired you to pursue those specific practice areas and case types?
Well, when I started out as a prosecutor, you kind of all start out doing, the simple stuff, the DUIs, the this, and then you get to progress and then do first, second degree felonies, third degree felonies, that kind of stuff. And then eventually you get to go to a special unit. I always felt a strong desire to go to units that would help people. For example, the domestic violence unit. I was in homicide for a bit. Public corruption, which is where I handled a lot of police misconduct cases. Sex crimes is probably the one that has my heart the most. I was there for, out of my 16 years as a prosecutor, I think 9 or 10 of them were probably spent in the special victims unit. And I think it's because, there's other special units, like, for example, there's organized crime and there's drug trafficking, and I'm not saying those are victimless crimes. I'm just saying those aren't the types of crimes that have an immediate impact on a victim, like a special victims unit case. And a lot of prosecutors and people don't want to go into those units because it is so emotionally draining. So I found myself going in there, and then sometimes, after I think it's 5 years, I take a break, go, as you see, hit up another unit and go, because you do need a break from that. It's really strong subject matter. It's really, and unlike when you're in homicide, which is very sad because there's a finality to it, it's different when you're in a special victims unit. You have the person who was harmed is still alive and they're still there, and they still have to process this. When it's a homicide, it's the family, which is still horrific, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more new, the nuance is a little different. And I think being in a special victims unit is probably the most difficult. And like I said, they always have a need for people there because people don't stay there very long. With a few exceptions, because nothing's a generality, but for example, men don't last in those units very long because, men and women we're different because of how we're raised, because of patriarchy, whatever. But when men get into that unit and they start reading each file, then they're like, some of them, and I understand them, they get enraged and they just want to physically hurt these people. And I understand that feeling, but obviously you can't do that in court. So I found that in my 9 years there, it was mostly women that lasted the longest, because I think you have to have a level of being able to carry other people's pain. Mm-hmm. Vicarious trauma, all that stuff. And I think I'm not a scientist, but I would imagine it's probably ingrained in women's DNA to be able to carry on other people's trauma, because that's what we just are expected to do. It's the most difficult job, I think, being in that particular unit, but it was also the most rewarding.
I definitely want to come back to the emotional impact and talk a little bit more about that and how you've navigated that over the years. But before I do that, I want to ask you, you mentioned your 16 years as a prosecutor. I'm sure you have an amazing list of stories. Can you share a memorable or challenging case from your time as a prosecutor?
It's true. There's so many. I probably have, somewhere close to 200 or probably over 200. I lost track after 150 something trials, right? And the trials aren't always the most memorable ones. They're the most exciting ones. But sometimes it's the cases that resolve, or sometimes it's the case you have to drop because you didn't have enough evidence, and you still felt the person was guilty. Like those are the cases that make an impact. But I can't pick one case, because I'll tell you this. For example, I have had so many of these cases where I always give the victim or the survivor, however people have different terms they prefer to use, but the the victim of the crime, afterwards I always give them an option. Do you want to stay in contact with me? And if you do, here's my socials, here's my phone. I mean, they have my cell phone numbers anyway, but feel free. And this is in criminal and in civil, but once our case is over, if you don't want to talk to me anymore, then that's fine, because I understand that even though you're thankful because I helped you and whatever, I represent a very difficult part in your life, and a traumatic part in your life. And if you want me out of it because you want to move on, I also won't take that personal, and I understand it. But I have had a lot of these. They were girls when I met them, and they're women now. And the relationships, I think that's the most memorable thing I have. I've been to weddings, I've been to baby showers, I've been to college graduations, high school graduations, and I've seen these girls grow up from being a victim on a case to identifying themselves as a survivor. Some of them going to law school, some of them becoming police officers, some of them becoming writers, and just doing great things. And to me, seeing these girls become the women they are, and move on. And of course, there's some sad stories too, and I stay in their lives and I try to help them. There's girls that develop drug addictions and I try to help them. But seeing the success stories is honestly the fuel that keeps me going, that keeps me like, okay, this, they don't know how much they mean to me, because there's days when I'm just like, I can't do this job anymore. I just can't. And I'll scroll on my social media and my face, and I see like a picture of one of them with their kids, or a picture of them on vacation, or a picture of them getting some award for something. And I'm like, okay, this is why we do it. We have to remember that those are the memorable things. I mean, there's so many memorable highlights in court that we could have a whole 5-hour session on funny things or scary things or horrible things, all types of things that we've seen in court. But I think what I take away the most is these relationships.
That's fantastic. I want to pivot real quick and talk a little bit about your media appearances over the years. So you've been featured a multitude of times in like TV news and articles. Have these media appearances provided you with any professional benefits over the years? And if so, how?
I developed my media connections when I was a prosecutor, especially when you're doing homicides more than anything, and even public corruption stuff. The media kind of follows. So you develop that kind of friendship. So then they start calling you when there's like another issue. And, I didn't benefit from it when I was a prosecutor. The last thing you want is a bunch of media, because you have it on all your cases. When you're a prosecutor, you're kind of under a scrutiny, which is why I tell people I like to hire former prosecutors and I like to hire former public defenders. And I tell law students all the time, like, go do 3 years, or think of it as a residency, like doctors that have to go. Like, you may not get paid as much, but think of it as where you're really going to learn. You can always teach lawyers the law. You can't teach lawyers the confidence that comes from being in a courtroom every day and having your feet put to the fire every day and all that stuff. So media didn't really help there. But those contacts and that type of stuff helped when I went private. And then, they still contact me on my cases, but a lot of times they'll just contact me to speak on other cases or other legal issues that are going on. And frankly, I find that easier. And I find that just easier to handle, because as a lawyer, when you're the lawyer on a case, you're very limited by what you can say. So when we're speaking to someone, I like to be very free and speak and whatever, and to limit myself is always a little bit more difficult, because you have to develop another layer. Like, oh, I can't say this. I can only talk about what's in the complaint. Like, when I'm commenting on other cases, I find that I can be more myself. I can say whatever it is I'm thinking. It's not my case. And I find that sometimes people will call, and it doesn't always mean that it's a client, but you do start getting a surge of calls, and you can help people. Like, even if it's a case that I'm not taking on or that I can't take on for whatever reason, you can give them resources. Here are victims advocates resources. Here's different places you can go, and you can help people. And honestly, the reason why I do media the most is for education, to help educate people on women's issues. Like, for example, everyone thinks, this is just a small one. We had one in Florida on a case a while back. And as a prosecutor, I knew, for example, in Florida, touching a woman, and this is graphic, I'm sorry, but this is the types of cases I handle. When you touch a woman on her vagina, if you don't penetrate, it's only a misdemeanor. It's not a sex offense. It's not anything. So it basically means, If the person is 16 years of age or older, grab away and you're just going to get a slap on the wrist. And I mentioned that in one of my interviews. And then it got like a lot of traction. And I think lobbyists are trying to work to change it and different things. And I think that's what the use of media should be. Let's inform people. Like, I don't think a lot of people knew that that's what the law was in Florida. So when you get to go on the news and they give you a platform like that, even if it's something else, I like to pivot to these types of things to inform people. And then that's where it's useful. Let's make changes.
Yeah, I think that's a great like motivation to do it. I guess my follow-up question to that is, have you seen any residual benefit from it? Like people, are contacting you directly with a case, they're following you on social media. Like I assume there's some type of halo effect to doing that.
You always find that once you've done some media for the next couple days, sometimes even weeks, depending on how big the story is or whatever, you do start getting a spike in calls. That doesn't mean all the calls are calls that you're going to follow up on, but that I have gotten cases from that. I've also, when I've done media on a case, I currently like that I have at the moment or whatever, when I do media on those, I've had cases where we did some news stories on it or whatever, and then more victims came forward and called us and joined the lawsuit. And that's common too. Like I said, information, because, if you say, okay, we're suing this person or this particular entity because of X, Y, and Z, and this is why it's wrong. And then people out there like, oh my God, that happened to me. And that, and that's, I think, the most helpful, because a lot of people think women are going to react a certain kind of way when, for example, a person touches them or whatever. Like, that's what you think. I'm going to react the way, I'm going to fight them, I'm going to this. But, most studies show that, I think it's something, I don't know if it was 80 something, 90 something % of women aren't going to fight. They're going to stay still. It's ingrained in our DNA from thousands of years of facing rape and assault and all these things. They don't flee. They don't fight. They usually, this is the normal expert. And I can tell you this from working on thousands of cases. And this is what I think I enjoy doing the most, is informing people. You're not going to react that way. Most likely you're going to freeze. Most likely you're going to say nothing afterwards, because you're still processing what happened and you're in disbelief. And then comes that second wave of, now you're blaming yourself. Did I do this? Did I not do enough to fight it? Did I acquiesce? Did he not think I meant no? Or all these things. And when you go on a media show, or you talk about it and you're talking about a lawsuit you filed, and you talk about, like, this is not how women react, or this is, not what's normal. And then you get more women calling saying, that's exactly what happened to me. And just that, whether it lands in a case or not, a lot of times it does, and a lot of times it doesn't. I'd say it's probably about 50-50. Sometimes you do get a case, sometimes you don't. But even when you don't, the validation that a woman feels when she's called is that, I heard what you said, and I feel less terrible about what happened to me because of my reaction to it or whatever. That's, I think, the main reason to do it, to educate people and make them feel better about this horrific thing that happened to them. That it's not your fault. That's how women are conditioned to act.
That's what keeps you coming back to do those media appearances. It's not some ulterior motive of, oh yeah, this is going to get me on TV and I can brag about this to my family and friends, or I'm going to get cases from this. It's all about educating the public.
Frankly, it really is, because I'm not like super thin. When I was younger, I probably would have loved that, because you always look great when you're in your 20s and stuff. But when you're much in your later 40s, it's not, you see your face and it's like, oh my God, my face is huge, my grays. And it's just, it's nitpicky everything. And I still remember, I think the first article that I had that made the front page, and it was me, and it was right after one of my pregnancies, and I was probably close to 300 pounds, and I was not feeling great about myself. And the cover photo, and I still haven't forgiven this particular reporter for that. Like, I still, when I talk to him, I think maybe it's been 15 years later or whatever, and I'm still bitter about it. And it's like me pointing at the defendant or something, but it's like, I have 5 chins. I look, it's horrific. It's a horrible picture. I'm glad you can't Google it, because he had misspelled my name, because I was a very young, prosecutor back then. And I remember thinking to myself, and this is the type of stuff that bothers, this is why I don't like doing media. Like, in terms of like I do it for informational purposes, but I saw that photo and I was like, oh my God, all my high school friends are going to see this, and my husband, and I know it's such a silly thing, because I'm like, I'm a feminist, I'm a woman. Like, why is this bothering me? And my husband's like, oh, don't you think that, your friends are just gonna be like, wow, she's a lawyer handling a big case and you just want it and it's the front page of the news. I go, no. I know how my friends were in high school, and that's not like so a lot of the people I knew in high school are just gonna be like, oh my God. And I hate that appearances, I think, will hold back a lot of women mostly, because I don't think men care. They could be balding in their 60s, and they're sure of what they say, and I think that's great. Overweight, they're not bothered by it. I think we as women are always like, how do I look? Am I looking okay? Is my double chin showing? Is my gray hair showing? And as I don't like doing media. That's the truth. I don't. I get nervous because of my appearance and whatever. And then I think to myself, these are stupid things. These are stupid things because no one's caring. When I'm watching TV, I'm not like sitting there judging people's appearances. I'm listening to what they're saying. And then I'm like, you have to stop having an ego about yourself that everyone's like dissecting you and whatever, because they're not. And just go out there and inform people. And that's what I think. That's why I will do media, or I'll do stuff, because I think if I can help one person like feel better about themselves, or understand and process something that's happened to them, then I can handle like looking a little chubby on TV.
Yeah, you overcoming your ego and taking the leap forward and doing the media appearances, it's probably helped you help hundreds of people over the years. So I think that's such a great answer, because I think a lot of lawyers will sometimes like jump to those ulterior benefits. It's like, well, what is this going to get me? Am I going to get cases from this? Am I going to get brand recognition? And like, obviously, like, yes, like that's part of the reason you do it. But I think your motivation is a much more sound and rewarding one, and one that won't cause you to just burn out after doing one or two media appearances, right? Because you can't expect to do a media appearance or two and be like, oh, you're the hot big attorney in this area on this type of practice area, right? You have to make a concerted effort and do it pretty consistently. So no, that's awesome. Thank you for talking about your experience with the media appearances. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier on in the podcast about the emotional toll that the cases that you've handled over the years has had, and how you kind of navigate that. And more specifically, I just wanted to ask, how do you balance your professional responsibilities with the personal impact of working on such emotionally charged cases?
It is the hardest part of my job. It's harder than going up against, because most of my cases, it's we're helping the little guy, and it's like some big corporation, and they have 50 lawyers, and that's stressful. But the emotional toll that these, and I'll be honest, it was much harder as a prosecutor than it is now on the civil side. On the civil side, it's still difficult because I exclusively handle sexual abuse and adult survivors, and all that, and it's difficult. But not, in the civil side, you're not dealing with, I think, as much of the rawness of it, and the justice aspect of it for that person going to prison. I think being a prosecutor is the toughest job I've ever had, and the most rewarding job I've ever had. But and I think we need to really be careful about who we elect as prosecutors too. I mean, there's a lot of good prosecutors out there, but there's usually two reasons why people become prosecutors. One, career prosecutors, obviously. I'm not talking about the people that go in for 3 years or whatever, which I think everyone should do because it gives you great experience. I'm talking about the ones that make a career and stay 10 years or longer, or whatever, 5 years or longer, that make a career out of being a prosecutor. There's two kinds. There's the kind that do it because they want to help people, and they find it might be selfish, because you do get a personal reward from that. You feel good about it. I tell people it's almost like a drug. You go to trial, you get this justice for this person, and you feel good. um and that's an aspect of it. You're helping someone. Their relief at seeing the person that raped them, or at seeing the person that killed their family go to prison, like, you know being believed. Sometimes also the hardship of them not being believed, and you having to explain to them that it's a jury of strangers that don't know them, and that part is hard. So some people become prosecutors for that, to help people, to help the community, to be public servants, because that's what you are when you're a prosecutor. And then there's the kind that become prosecutors because it's a power trip, because you do have immense power as a prosecutor. You have the decision to. And originally, I wanted to be a public defender when I was in law school, and the recruiter for the prosecutors told me, because I had interned at the public defender's office. I'm very liberal, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I want to do." And she told me, she goes, "The thing about being a prosecutor is you always have the power to do the right thing, more so than anyone in that courtroom, really. And that kind of sold me on it. And I said, and when I became a prosecutor, though, that's what I realized, that there's two different kinds. There's a kind that does it for like a political type of career move, or to get power, to get the status, and then there's, I think, the majority of them that do it to help because they have this sense of justice that they want to pursue. Um, but it comes with a toll, and I think the prosecutors that do it for the right reasons feel that toll deeply. And my suggestion, and I've been suggesting this for years, is prosecutors' office, especially special victims unit cases, homicide units, like those type of people, should have a mental health check-in every year or two, just to unburden yourself, because vicarious trauma is a true thing, and every day you're dealing with the most horrific things. Like, you open a file and you think things can never get worse, like nothing can ever get more disgusting, and you move on to the next one and you're like, how could people be this vile and horrible? And I'll tell you, I've sat there with new files in my office as a prosecutor, closed the door and just wept at what I'm reading. Wept. And there was no person coming around to check on us. Like, none of that was done back then. I don't think it's even being done now, but I'm at least they're talking about it now. But back then it was just kind of like, suck it up and move on, and we're just have to keep going, and I don't think that's good. I think you have to have self-care. I've had moments that are really dark, where I feel like, how can I continue doing this? How is the world, because you're seeing the worst of the world every day. That's what it is. And most people don't. Most people go to their jobs and they might see the worst, like on the news for an hour. But when your job from 9, and I'd say 9 to 5, but it's really more like 8 to 7 or whatever, it's just the horribleness of the world. And that's what you're seeing every day. And that's what you're dealing with. It's going to take a toll. You think it isn't, but it is. And if you don't take care of yourself, and I'm not saying this because I'm someone that's I've gone through the darkness and I've been really bad. And I think the only thing that helped was obviously my family and whatever, they helped me out. But now I'm trying to be more aware. I try to be, have moments of self-care. I try to unplug, at least. Obviously, if there's emergencies, you have to handle them. And I tell people, when you become a lawyer, it's not like becoming a doctor in the sense we're not that important. Doctors save actual lives and whatever, but in the sense that you're always on call, especially with the types of cases I handle. If my phone rings and it's one of my clients, I don't know. It could be something really serious because they have a lot of like depression and mental health issues, and so I have to pick up the phone. But I've been trying to tell myself that I have to at least unwind one day, like on Sundays. I can't, I need to just take a break. I try not to, I don't really share any of these, like the details or things with my family, because I don't want that to be dinner topic conversations. As a matter of fact, I try to separate the two worlds, and this is not something I want to discuss in general. You know what I mean? Like, because you have to take steps. You have to see someone, even if it's once a year. I'm not saying you have to regularly go to therapy, but do a check-in and self-care. Just be aware of the trauma you're taking on.
Is it fair to say that the thing that kept you in the prosecution game for so long was that feeling of justice being served, that high that you mentioned? Like, because everything you just described, it, like, I'm kind of thinking to myself, like, that this sounds like the hardest job ever. I don't know why someone would, like, any person with sound judgment or sanity would want to do this for 16 years. But it sounds like the juice is worth the squeeze.
Yes, and what you said is so true. Like, why does anyone want to be a prosecutor? That's why there's two people. There's people that do want to serve, and and then there's the people that want it for the power and status that it brings them. But it's the most rewarding, and it pays so very little. That's another thing. We need to pay our prosecutors and our public defenders more. That's the truth. Like, we need to pay them both more, because they are on the front lines of justice. Public defenders are there serving poor people that can't afford lawyers, and prosecutors are there, and they both have huge caseloads, and they get paid nothing. I mean, when I tell you, I really didn't get paid very much, like at all, for the 16 years I was there. And I stayed there because I was like, we could make it work. And I left at one point for like a year or two, went on my own. I went back to it because you miss it. Like, you miss it. I tried to do family law and some criminal defense at one point, and I think criminal defense attorneys, and a lot of my best friends are criminal defense attorneys. I admire them so much. Someone needs to do this. And me as a prosecutor, I prefer to go up against competent, good defense attorneys because that person's rights are being upheld. And if I get a conviction on this, it's the right way. I don't never want to steamroll anyone. I want each person to have the best defense possible. And if I win after you've done the best you can, and then I feel better about it. I never felt good when you went against bad lawyers. So I always I just think that, like, I lost my train of thought of where we were going with this. I'm sorry. That being a prosecutor, we were talking about low pay for prosecutors. Yeah, it's just, it is a high. It's such, there's no better feeling in the world, I think, than when you get to tell, like, a little girl or little boy, that yes, you were believed. And a lot of times there's DNA evidence or there's other evidence, but that's not what they're worried. They're worried about, did people believe me? And the look of relief on their faces when it comes back guilty, the tears that they know that the person that did these horrific things to them is going to go to prison for life, or it's going to go to prison for a very long time, or you feel like crying sometimes. You can't. You got to be the prosecutor. You got to be tough, and you got to be in the courtroom. But people forget we're human too. We're human, and you get emotional. I'll tell you this. People ask me, "Oh, what's your most?" I remember in the sex crimes unit when my first stint there, I probably did like 90 trials back to back. Right, won a bunch of them because it was just, I inherited kind of a big caseload, and there were a lot of old cases. So every week I was in trial, every week, and it was like that whole year almost seems like a blur because it was just And everybody's like, "Oh, what case do you remember the most?" I was like, which ones I remember the most? The ones I lost. I lost 3 of them. I have never forgotten those 3 cases, mind you. And it's 3 out of whatever. It was like 90. Those 3 cases will haunt me because you have to go tell this kid this, and 2 of them were cases that maybe could have gone either. One of them was a case, and this is what I tell people. I tell my clients this now, and I tell lawyers this: no matter how great you are, a trial is always a gamble. Your odds may be good, you may have good, but it's always a gamble because you're putting your, I remember that one case, like I said, it was a good case. I had a confession. I kind of probably went into it a little too cocky, thinking, "Oh, I'm a great trial attorney." Because I am. I'm really good. I'm a great trial attorney. I could do this, and it humbled me when they came back not guilty. And I was like, "What?" There was a confession. That spoke to some of the jurors afterwards, because I like to speak to jurors if they're willing to, because they don't have to, afterwards, and be like, "Hey, what could I have done? Let me make this a learn, teach it. What did it for you? Like, why was it a not guilty? Like, what could I have done different?" And when 2 of the jurors told me, and this was a long time ago, this wasn't even recently, we're talking about when I first started in that unit, so maybe 07, 06, like early 2000s. He 2 jurors, a lady and a man, tell me she was here illegally. It was a little girl that had been touched by her stepfather. Mom marries this person. They were here illegally, but she marries this person, and blah blah blah. He admits it. Mind you, he didn't have any priors or anything, but he admits that he touched her inappropriately. And I asked the jurors, and they were like, "Well, she's here illegally anyway. She shouldn't have been here." And that kind of broke me because I'm like, "Oh my God, the only reason." And then I start thinking to myself, I didn't weed that out in voir dire. I didn't even think to ask that because I'm Hispanic and I live in South Florida where everybody's Hispanic, and I just didn't even that thought. And I tell people this: you learn more from the losses than you do from. You better believe if I have a client, like, I will always ask that now, and I will try to get people's views. Like, every loss that you have, whether it's a trial or a hearing or whatever, you learn more from the losses than you do from the wins.
Yep, absolutely. That makes total sense. I want to ask about your time with Eisenberg and Baum. You've been there now 7 years?
I don't think it's 7. I started in 2019.
Oh, 2019. Okay, so
at the very beginning of 2019. So
5 years plus.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer. I'm bad at math, but yeah, 5 years plus sounds right.
So obviously that was a big pivot from being, a prosecutor. How has your role evolved since joining Eisenberg and Baum, and what are your main focuses as partner there now?
The reason I transitioned over there is, like I joke with people and I say all the time, like, oh, it was a free trip. I lived in South Florida. I was like, it's a free trip to New York. They want to fly me out to interview me. Like, I'll go. I got all my family up there. It's kind of half true. Um, I didn't really think much of it. I met with the partners, with Eric and Doug, and honestly, it's not the typical law firm. Hear a lot of people say that, but I worked at a law firm before I went to be a prosecutor, so I know what a law firm is like. And I was a prosecutor for 16 years. Like, I wouldn't have just jumped ship for anything. I really hit it off with these guys, and what I like the most about them is they really believe in doing right. It's not just I mean, yeah, we all get paid because nobody works for free, but the culture is not, we are only going to take cases if it's big money. It's, can we make a change? They've argued Supreme Court cases, like not my department, but they really believe in that. And I think their business model, because they do like transactional stuff too, I think it allows them to be able to have, like, I guess, passion projects, and then still have the billable hours people that probably make all the real money that allow me to have my job. um but it was a very rewarding thing. And I felt like it was 16 years as a prosecutor, and my old boss was retiring. I wasn't sure. I thought about running at one point for state attorney, but he was like, he wasn't sure if he was retiring or not. I thought he, it's time for me to move on. I've done this for 16 years. I've done everything. Like, I had done homicides, sex crimes, domestic violence, public corruption. I'm just like, I want something different, but I still want to be able to help people and be someone that can help guide people through our process, and help them get some kind of feeling of justice. And I still get that now. But now we're it's the corporations or the institutions that are responsible for ignoring so it's a little different. And yes, getting them settlements or money or trials, whatever, it's rewarding, but it's never as rewarding as, you know you're going to jail for what you did. Like, you're really going to pay for it. I also find that lawyers on the criminal side are way more civil than lawyers on the civil side.
And then, Adriana, what are your main focuses as a partner at Eisenberg and Baum?
Well, currently I run the department that handles sexual abuse, adult survivor cases. We handle sexual harassment cases as well. So we do some employment, only if it's like sexual harassment. We have another whole employment department that handles racial discrimination and all kinds of stuff. I only really handle sexual assaults and that kind of stuff, even if it's in the workplace. Child adult survivors, Child Victims Act cases. That's the kind of cases we handle, and I run that department. And that's why I say I love Eisenberg and Baum. They brought me in to be like their trial person, to just kind of try cases in other divisions, and help be the trial person. And I started off doing that, and then I just started getting referrals from people and cases, and people calling me because I've been doing this for 16 years. And so they're like, if this is what you feel passionate about, and they gave me a department. They eventually made me partner. We have enough cases, and I still, though, volunteer for the other departments. And I'm like, if you got any trials going, let me go. Because, when you're a prosecutor, you get like a trial every month, and you're always in trial. And here in the civil world, you don't. You get maybe one a year if you're lucky. It's not the same. And I do miss that a lot. I miss being a prosecutor, for the sense of like, but this is also a little less stressful, not having to be in trial all the time.
It's interesting you said less stressful, because I'm sure there's still a high element of stress in your role. I mean, you went from prosecutor to now spearheading an entire department at a large law firm. I assume in your role, you're managing attorneys, and being an attorney is very different than managing attorneys. Can you talk about, or rather give some leadership or management advice to our listeners that might be responsible for managing an attorney or team of attorneys?
Yeah, and my first experience and I wasn't really managing attorneys when I was a prosecutor. I kind of sometimes would be a supervisory role because I was more senior, and I'd help people do trials, and it was more educational type of stuff, which I think is a little different than what I'm doing now. So this was my first experience in really managing attorneys when they started. At first it was just like one or two, and Two of the ones that started out in my division, they're partners now heading up their own departments, which is, like I said, it's what I love about this firm, that they really will let you follow your dreams and your passions. Um, but whenever I get new attorneys, it's a team. I like to, before we take on a case, get their input. Do you think we should take this case on? Do you think we should decline it? Like, what are the, I always tell, and whenever clients call, a lot of people are like, sign here and get the retainer. I won't do that. As a matter of fact, a lot of times people joke because I try to talk people out of suing. I tell them how difficult it's going to be. This type of case, I go, this isn't a car accident. They're going to delve into all your medical records. They're going to try and make you seem like a horrible person. They're going to try and destroy you and bring you down, because that's what our justice system does to victims. Unfortunately, it's the way it works. So I want them to be hyper aware of what the avalanche they're going to be facing from these big, powerful law firms. And I'm going to be there and be your shield and help you, but I need to know you're in this with me. And before we get that kind of commitment from the client, I want to make sure that everyone on my team is on board. And what I like to do too is, I tell people this all the time, other people that manage stuff, even with some of the partners that first managed me when I first came in, I was like, you brought me in to be a trial lawyer and to direct the team. And there was a brand new lawyer. He's a partner now, but he was like a newer lawyer there, a younger lawyer, never done a trial. It was his first trial. And we'd been doing some practices. And I go, this is the person that needs to cross-examine the main, the hospital's main person. Why we brought you in? Because I would love, if it's my ego, I'd love to go and be the person. I mean, that's what every lawyer likes to do. Cross-examination is the most fun part of being a lawyer, right? And I said, I'd love to do it. My ego would love for me to cross-examine the main person, but I'm telling you this, his style is going to be more effective. And I'm like, I'm bazooka and he's scalpel, and we need a scalpel. And that's why you brought me on, because you need to take my expertise on this, and I'll let you. And he did it. And, I did tell him, it's like, no pressure. My job probably relies on how well you do this cross. But he killed it. He killed it. And that's the thing, is you have to realize when you're managing a team, you're not always the best person for the job. Someone else on your team, and that's the thing, is build a team that complements you. I joke, I'm not a writer. Man, I can barely write. I mean, English wasn't even my first language. I'm not a great writer. So I surround myself by a team of good writers. And, and I surround myself with people who maybe will see a case differently and think differently. You can't surround yourself with a bunch of sycophants who are just going to be like, oh, you're so great and you're so amazing, and I just want to do, no. People that will challenge you is what you need. People that can do things better than you. I mean, I joke, and they're like, oh, how good? I'm like, I'm successful because I hire great people. Like, I surround myself with good people. And let your ego take a back seat. Let the client and the case take the front seat, and you'll always have better results. And you'll have a great team. I mean, I know a lot of people say this, but I never thought I'd leave the state attorney's office as a prosecutor and have the same camaraderie that I had with those people that I worked with. And I really do. I mean, these are younger. They're all younger than me. So there's also the generational thing, like they probably don't get some of the jokes if I say, oh, do you have low jack on? They're like, what's a low jack? Or, they're more familiar with things my kids are familiar with, because my oldest son is 22. But it works. I also appreciate, I don't think that because I've been doing this for whatever, 22 years, I know more than you do. There are some things I'm going to know more than you about. But there's also a lot of new ideas and new ways of thinking that I haven't thought of. And I found I've always thought this. You always bring in people with better ideas than you. Don't be afraid of people that are better than you, because when that wave comes, they're going to lift you up too. You can't be self-centered. It can't be about you. It's not my department and what I want and what I think and I'm the star. No, we're a team.
What are you looking for when you're bringing someone onto the team? Like when you're going through that interview process, what characteristics, attributes are you looking for to make sure that this person's going to be the right fit for your team? You already alluded to, hiring for your weaknesses or other people on the team's weaknesses, like that makes total sense of rounding out the department. But what other things are you looking for on top of that?
I always like to make sure, and people joke around, but when there's an interview, I like for the whole team to kind of meet them and see how they vibe, because it could be the most impressive resume, the smartest person. If they're not going to click with everyone, it's not going to work. So I like to think that you have to make sure the chemistry is right with everyone. You know, I like to make sure we have diversity, and I know that's kind of a hot topic now, but I think that's important. Make sure we hire. And look, I have white men on my team. I'm not gonna, it's not that I don't. We do, but I like to make sure that we have diversity, because then you get different opinions and different experiences. For example, someone that's not Hispanic, I'm Hispanic. Someone that's not Hispanic may not know, um, they might not understand certain aspects of certain cases. Someone who's an immigrant from a child of immigrants from another place may have a different understanding. Someone who's a different minority may understand the case better. And those type of insights aren't insights you can teach. Kind of like what I said, I like people that are comfortable in court. Public defenders and prosecutors, no matter where you find them from, are people that are going to be comfortable in court. That's why I tell people, just do that. Even if it's for 3 years, you can't teach that. Things you can't teach, because I tell everyone, the law, you can always teach what the law is. You can always teach what to do. I mean, you do want someone that has some knowledge or some experience, but I think for me, it's bigger to, like you said, fill in the spots. Like, I need a good writer. I need someone who can do this, but also someone who can bring unique perspectives
Yeah, it sounds
to
like it was a combination of like culture fit is really important. They're going to get along well with the team because let's face it, like we spend just as much, if not more, time with the people we work with than our own friends and
yeah,
family. So you really need to make sure that the chemistry, like you say, is going to work out. And then you also mentioned diversity, making sure that you have a diverse team with unique backgrounds and experiences. And then I think the third thing you said was basically like hands-on real world experience, right? Like with you talking about you always recommend people get 3+ years of prosecution experience before they even maybe go into private practice. So I think that's a great list of things for our listeners that might be leading teams, hiring attorneys should be considering as well. I want to ask a couple more questions, Adriana. I really appreciate all your responses today. So talking about sex crimes and police misconduct, because I think those are like two key areas you focused on over the last 20 years. What are some of the most significant changes you've seen in the legal landscape concerning like civil remedies for victims of sex crimes or police misconduct?
well, and unfortunately for police misconduct, there hasn't been much change. They're still, have, immunity, and it's very difficult to sue police officers, which is why I enjoyed when I was a prosecutor. You still can make sure that legally they're held accountable, for crimes. So, on the civil side, it's very difficult, and I don't really handle police misconduct cases now. I mean, I have handled some that involve sex crimes, and a lot of the cases I prosecuted as a prosecutor were police officers. Because of my background, they put me to prosecute like a lot of, if there was a sexual misconduct case or a rape or whatever. Um, for women, I have seen a significant change. A lot of states are opening up look back windows. A lot of states have done things not just for children but for women. And I think when one state does it, then another state starts to do it. And it's probably one of the few things that isn't super divided now politically. I think Republicans and Democrats, even though they disagree on everything, I think a lot of them kind of agree that survivors of sex abuse should have rights to sue. And they're all against human trafficking. Or at least they say they are, regardless of who goes on what Epstein trip or not. They say that this is something that's important to them. So I do see that more states will continue doing changes. I've also seen a significant shift in jury attitudes towards this. From when I first started doing sex crimes back in, I think it was 03 or, maybe 03, 4, I don't remember, but it was a long time ago. You had a case when an adult woman was raped, and it was just a death nail. Like, you usually weren't going to get a guilty. The attitudes of the jurors were kind of like, I remember I had one that it wasn't my trial, but I went to see it. She was a colleague of mine, and honestly, she was amazing trial. She's probably one of the stars we had in that unit. And she went on to be a federal prosecutor and is still doing amazing. But I remember this one trial where this one woman who was a lesbian and was out, and she was a truck driver, and she had known these men for a long time, and they basically raped her so brutally that she had bruises. And I mean, that's the type of case that you're like, okay, this should be a guilty. and the defense was she liked it rough. And I feel like jurors just, is there was any like grain of like, we can believe the other side, I'll do it. And they didn't believe women. I've seen in real time, and I find it hard for those women back then, but rewarding, that you go now and it's not like that. They're open. I'm not saying they're automatically like, oh yeah, I'm guilty or whatever, but they're open and they're listening, and they're believing women more. And I think that's because of the Me Too movement, and that's because of women sharing their stories. And now people used to think, I think this is so rare, it rarely happens, but now we know it happens all the time to a lot of women, to most women. And I think that change, more than civil remedies, because those are legal. And I think, I commend everyone out there doing lobbying for extending the statute of limitations and for helping out survivors. And I think it's really commendable. And they've been fighting for years for this, and they're finally start getting it. California had one, New York had one. I think Florida's trying to see if they might do one too. So it's just, because I handle cases all over the country, and I see that some states are changing. But what I think has been the most rewarding for me is seeing the attitude of jurors change with the times.
So it sounds like in the last 20, 25 years, there's been a lot of progress in terms of how sex crimes are being handled. And on the police misconduct side, you said not so much.
Not so much. Unfortunately, just not so much. I mean, it's just, I think, I do think this, in terms of police misconduct, I think, and something else I've seen in real time. When you're old, you can see all these changes in real time, body cams. Body cams are a game changer. Because, before it's just like, oh, this person said they hit me. And if you didn't have a surveillance camera and I didn't see them beating the person up, there's cases where I was able to try because of surveillance cameras, because they didn't have body cam back then,
Right.
And I think to myself, had this happened without the surveillance camera, who would have believed this like 4-time convicted felon? Nobody. And these cops would have gotten away with it, and it's terrible. And then it's funny because when I started doing public corruption, you start kind of getting, I guess, a reputation in the jail. So I started getting contacted by like people in prison and being like, there was one person who was like sending a bunch of letters. Oh, this particular cop is stealing our drugs, doing all this stuff. And everybody's like, oh, whatever, sure, But then you start looking and you're like, okay, well, this isn't the only person that says this. You set up like an undercover sting with other cops and he was in fact doing it. So it's just like, I think maybe that's also changed a little bit, not as much as it has for women. And again, I still want to emphasize, women still have such a long way to go. It's not by any means fair or equal. I'm just saying there has been some small improvements in it. And I think that the advent of the body cam will be the catalyst for getting more justice against police misconduct, the way that the Me Too movement was for women. And like I said, baby steps, snail's pace,
Right.
Because that's how it went for women too. And I think that's how it's going to go for police misconduct cases, depending on how elections go and how courts go. Obviously, all those things are important.
Well, you've shared a ton of great advice and insight, and I wanted to end on this question. What advice would you give to aspiring lawyers who wish to help victims of sexual assault or sex abuse crimes?
First thing I would say, and you know what? I know I said earlier, every lawyer should do 3 years as either a prosecutor or a public defender. Let's say public defender too. Is it's not every lawyer, because if you want to do mergers or real estate or transactional stuff where you're probably going to make real money anyway, like if you want to do that type of stuff, then you don't need to do this. But if you want to be a litigation attorney, if you want to do trials, if you want to do those things, especially if you want to help survivors of sex crimes, you want to do that even before you go to a law firm like mine, or because there's a lot of good law firms, and I know them all. We go to the same conferences together. There's a lot of law firms that dedicate themselves just to doing this, and you get to know each other. And because our cases are different, they're not like everybody else's. This isn't a car accident. We understand damages are different, how you have to work cases. We have a great network of plaintiffs lawyers that handle exclusively these cases, and we all get along really well. And the first thing we say is just, I think lawyers that want to do this should go into being a prosecutor. Probably even more than being a public defender, honestly. Because if you want to do litigation, then go to either. Go to either, because either side, you're going to get a lot of experience and you're going to get a lot of work. The only thing is when you're a prosecutor, like, for example, we called them baby lawyers. Like I was a baby lawyer, like when you first graduate, you're a baby lawyer for like a year or two. When you're a baby lawyer as a prosecutor, you're going up against baby lawyer public defenders, but you're also going up against 30-year attorneys. So I think the experience you get is a little bit better. But once you're at the 5-year level of experience, it's kind of the same. But those initial 3 years, I think you get a more experience as a prosecutor. It's different though, because public defenders also get experience doing a lot more cross, and they get there's gives and takes. But my advice to them is pick one, and go to that. And things that they don't teach you in law school, learn how to deal with people, how to handle people. These people that you see are going to have been through such horrible things, and you're not a therapist. That's the first thing you have to tell them, because they're going to think you're their therapist. You're not a therapist. You're there to help them. But learn how to guide and learn how to handle that, because that's not something they teach you in law school. Like I said, it's invaluable to go do those things. I don't think after 3 years at a prosecutor's office, I'm not even looking at what law school you went to or what grades you got in law school. Like, I don't care about that stuff. And frankly, I think most lawyers that are like good trial lawyers, that's not something we're looking for. If your writing sample, if I'm looking for a writer and your writing sample is good, or if I'm looking for, another trial attorney and I go watch your trial, it's like, I don't care if you went to a 4th-tier law school.
Right.
And I think being a prosecutor for 3 years or, so gives you that level of comfort, that level of experience. I can teach you the civil stuff and as long as you're comfortable going into a courtroom, because when you're a prosecutor and a public defender, every day they're like, here's a file, you're handling this. You got to think on your feet. That's something you can't teach, that quickness, and it's going to be the most stressful thing, but it'll be the most rewarding, and you're going to get so much experience. Like, if you really want to help people, that's the place to start.
I think it's great advice. I mean, it's have you heard of the 10,000 hour rule, or the book by Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell? It basically says in order for you to become truly adept at something, you need to devote 10,000 hours to it.
I have heard of that. Yeah. Yes, so I have heard.
You're not going to learn it in a seminar or taking a course or anything like that. You just got to like roll up your sleeves, get in the trenches, and do the job.
That's probably the best advice ever. I got to tell you, I tell people, and people laugh at me because my son wants to go to law school, and I was like, I think that, I'm trying to talk him out of it, honestly, but I was like, all right, that's what you want to do. I'm like, you're taking on other people's problems as your life. Like, that's what you're doing. But I'm just like, I don't know. It's just, everybody thinks being a lawyer is like this glamorous thing, and it's not. It's really not.
They watch Suits or they watch Law and Order, and they think it's...
Yeah, and I'm like, that's not what it is. Like, the fun trial is 1 week that took a lot of back hours of work and this and the other. Like, that, you see only the fun part on TV. I just tell people, like, be certain that's what you want to do, before you do it. And if you do, then remember you're serving people. Like, you're a servant. There's nothing like, you're not more important than anybody else. You know what I mean? Like, you're just basically here to give people legal advice and to help guide them through something that they don't understand, because they haven't studied. But law school's useless. I found law school so useless. The only class I found, and I love I went to UM, and I like my professors, but I'll be honest, I think the most useful thing was probably litigation skills, where we actually did little trials, like little fake trials and, that type of stuff. But I didn't learn to be a lawyer till day one as a prosecutor. Day one, they hand me a file, and then I go to court. You're picking a jury on this. And that was my experience from day one till I left. I left getting sentenced, like, not me getting sentenced, but doing a sentencing for a trial. I just, like, that's how it is. You have no time. And what's nice is that they start you off with cases that aren't hugely like a big deal. You do DUIs, you do, misdemeanor batteries, disorderly conduct, so that if you lose, there's not like a travesty, you know what I mean? But you get to learn evidence, you get to learn objections. I joke, I'm not a legal scholar, I'm not a legal mind. Like, I'm not like, I know evidence. And you know why I know evidence? Not because I'm a brainiac, or because I've done over 200 trials, and that's what comes up. It's evidence issues. I know impeachment. I know how to get around objections, not because I'm some savant or some talent, because I've done it. so many times. That's it. You're right. I love that quote. That's a great quote.
This has been an awesome conversation. Adriana, thank you so much for joining me today. How can our listeners learn more about you and your firm?
They can visit our law firm, enblaw.com. They can look me up. They can just Google me. I think that a couple of things will come up, but that's probably the first one. Adriana Alcalde, Eisenberg and Baum partner, or whatever. And that's how they can learn more about me. And I'm on social media. I'm not huge on it because my generation is I'm still on Facebook. I just joined TikTok like recently because my 15-year-old daughter kind of pulled me into it, and I'm it's interesting. It's an interesting little app, and I think you get a lot of unfiltered news. You also get a lot of stuff that's not true because they don't have like the fact or whatever. But if you can muddle through it, like I feel like you get a lot of uncensored news, which is interesting. And the nice thing is that there's so many bad things happening in the world, and like news is so depressing that at least with TikTok you get like a funny video in between, so you can at least have some dopamine and laugh a little.
You can balance out the negative with the positive. Well, so for our listeners, the best way to learn more about Adriana and her firm would be to just look her up on Google, or Google the firm Eisenberg and Baum based in New York, and you can jump to her attorney page and read more about her background. But again, Adriana, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. To our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Pareto Legal Podcast, and we will see you next time for another episode.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a bit of pleasure meeting you.
It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Adriana.
Thanks.